armoured men stuck in the mud, besieged protesters holding out in tunnels while monstrous machines devour the very earth. This is the medieval hellscape that is Lützerath 2023. How did this happen? Where has the Green Party left its soul? What did the RWE Corporation whisper in Robert Habeck's ear in a locked room many months ago? Megan and Konrad settle down with a mug of herbal and a miraculously fluffy chocolate cake while energy expert Izzy Choksey breaks it all down. More tea, Vicar.
Hello everyone, it's time for another Megan's Megacan. I'm here, as always, in Berlin with Ex-Berliner Magazine, with Konrad Werner. Hello, Konrad.
Hello.
And with friend of the podcast, Izzy Choksey. Hello, Izzy.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
We're very excited to have you back. We're going to talk lots about Lützerath, which is... Anyway, we'll get to that. We don't have any Megacans this week. We're having tea instead and also some cake because, well, for various reasons. Izzy's pregnant.
I am.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And I'm sort of trying to do not dry January, but damp January, which is a concept my friend introduced me to, where you don't completely give up alcohol, but try and rein it back from the edge of the abyss, which was sort of the end of December. It was just a bit much.
Yeah, I'm trying to do that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite good. It's got healing. I feel like it's quite nice having a hot mug of herbal tea in my hand.
It is. I go wild for the herbal teas whenever I'm not drinking alcohol.
I'm very much on the other side of where you guys are. I am desperate.
Dying for a mega.
mega.
Not long now.
There's that lovely feeling that washes over you when you get through halfway. You're like, I can't remember my name.
Yeah.
This cake is insane.
Oh,
Is it?
It is incredible.
Too, because Megan made a cake.
Okay.
Homemade cake.
So
Amazing.
I can talk about the cake the way I usually talk about the megas. Yeah. I was at my friend Carol, who's from Alaska, which is really cool, and is also a teacher in Berlin. And she had her birthday and served this amazing cake, and it's vegan. And then what I loved, she was like, I'll let you take a picture of the recipe. And it was this like old kind of not hand printed, but printed it by a school, like her school's recipe thing, like one of these ones where all the parents write in, like, and this was like her auntie's recipe or something, and I just love it. So yeah,
it is so good and it's so fluffy.
It's vegan, so it's also incredibly healthy. Not really. It's got loads of sugar in it, which is what you have to do. I'm not one of these people that we have to do, it's nice to have vegan for various reasons.
But this is vegan.
Oh, vegan.
I would never have guessed.
Well, there you go.
Isn't that the biggest compliment that you can make?
Yeah.
I think so. I mean, certainly with vegan cakes.
Yeah.
But also I think people give vegan cakes a little bit of a bad name because what they do is they go vegan and then they try and be healthy and they start saying things like, well, I just replaced the sugar with this thing from a thing and then I replaced the thing with have no truck with that. Your vegan cake recipes need radiating agent, which is vinegar. You need some soda in there, usually some water, oil, and a shit ton of sugar. Mm-hmm. And then you're usually in the right place.
But what have you put instead of butter?
Oil.
What kind of oil?
So cooking oil, rapeseed oil, or what's called canola oil in the States, which is the same thing, I think.
It's just the perfect texture of cake.
It's good. I'm really pleased with this, and I'm happy it worked out. Vegan cakes are also, by the way, incredibly easy to make.
You say that, and
everyone
you
says follow
that
the recipe
when they're baking. Just follow the recipe.
I don't.
Just
but literally with this one, I would start out with vegan cakes because the recipe is you just have to follow the recipe. And often, when I watch people who say they follow recipes, and I watch them with my baker's eye and my teacher's eye, they don't, in fact, follow the recipe. So I don't know, Izzy, if I were to peek over your shoulder. But anyway, it's literally you put it all in a bowl and you stir it up and you stick it in the oven, and then you do have to watch it a bit because the cooking time varies, but that's it. I'm pleased with this.
This
I'm
is
happy.
absolutely delicious.
Yeah. All right.
All right.
We can't just keep talking. The part where I
finishing-
try
I'm
and
finishing
distract
and
us
then
by
I'm
talking
finished.
about mega cans or food is over, and we must, in fact, talk about the news.
Yeah, well, we want to talk. This is going to be the Lützerath Special.
Did I even introduce Izzy as anything other than... No, I didn't. I'm sorry. Friend of the podcast, but also a very important and impressive person in her own right, not connected to this podcast.
I'm
The
just come
policy
over
advisor
cake.
for a German think tank and co-host of Radio Spätkauf. One of the other German news or Berlin news.
Well, no, I was very excited because Izzy got in touch after the last podcast, which was only a few days ago. We usually don't do the podcast so quickly, but
Well, this is just us being sober, you see.
this is us being sober and
Productive.
organised, and also because the news is happening right now, I thought it would be good to get this out and to talk about it.
Yeah.
Because I think it's a very important issue and thing that is happening. Yeah, so you might have noticed if you've looked at any news, and it's been like an international story with Lützerath, which is a town in western Germany in North Rhine-Westphalia.
Tiny little village.
Tiny little village. It's,
What is the, or was the population? Does anyone know?
I think it was about 300, and they
Okay.
all left before 2020, and it's been occupied by climate protesters
Yeah.
in the years since.
We're talking about about a dozen buildings right now, aren't we?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's about 12 buildings, something like that. It is very close to an open cast mine full of lignite, the Garzweiler mine, and it's been part of the plans for Germany has been to keep mining there. And so I was wondering, but last October, the German government, along with the North Rhine-Westphalian government, along with Rewe, RWE, not the supermarket, RWE, the energy giant, made a deal.
Sometimes I do go into Rewe and like, oh my god, I fucking hate you guys, and then I'm like, oh, you're not
Yeah.
RWE, you're just Rewe.
Yeah. They made a deal, October, which said that they would be allowed to tear down this last remaining village. So they've already torn down several villages in that region to get more lignite out of the ground. Lignite is the brown, also called brown coal.
It's a really bad one. It's not
Yeah.
even like...
The worst one.
It's sort of the most inefficient coal, so you have to burn more of it to get the same amount of energy as like...
And it's got all
better
the
coal.
crap inside as well.
Yeah, and then so there have been protests going on over there about what they were going to do, and maybe you could just explain what exactly was this deal that was made.
Okay, so I think we should first start by going back to the election of Mona Neubauer and Heinrich Wüst, which is so the Prime Minister of NRW, and Mona Neubauer is the Energy Minister. So last year there was a huge local election, state level election in NRW that elected this new government. That's the CDU and the Greens. And this was just at the beginning of the summer that they got elected and came out with their Koalitionsvertrag. I think you guys covered all of those state elections, so just go back to that podcast episode.
I don't remember, and I was there, so thanks for the recap.
But yeah, so there was quite a lot of hope because the Greens campaigned on earlier phase-out date, and which was very quickly accepted by the CDU as well. So the earlier phase-out date of 2030. And they also campaigned on Paris targets as well of 1.5 degrees. And they also campaigned on a message of save the villages. So save the villages, plural, because there were 6 villages that were going to be destroyed by RWE. Lützerath is one of these 6. And essentially what happened is that Lützerath was always kind of a bit of an outlier. There's been sort of legal cases that got concluded back in February when the last resident or the last landowner, a guy called Herr Eckert, he lost his final case, and he basically said, well, this is the end of the road for me. The climate movement needs to take my place, basically, because I can't fight anymore. He'd been fighting them for decades. So he lost his case, and in March a court basically said that RWE would be able to destroy this land. So they had no more land disputes, which is not the case for the other 5 villages. So Lützerath was kind of like the path was clear for RWE to destroy it. However, there are obviously still political considerations, right? Like a state government is not powerless to stop these kind of things from happening. They can do deals with companies, they can stop companies, they can also say this is not in the best interests of a population and essentially make it come to a stop.
Can I ask, potentially like a very stupid question, but like, how does it even come to this? That like, I can understand a company coming in and saying, we've bought all this land and we're offering to buy people out of their homes. Okay, we're going to give you whatever it is, the market value or above market value of your home. But if they don't want to move, like, how does that work?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Like forced sale.
I mean, so you're not like
expropriation.
illegal.
I don't know. Like that's actually
that
like
to me
a
just
really
seems demented.
Yeah.
And this whole idea, and even if you're kind of, that's kind of one of the central sort of tenets of capitalism and the right to own your own home, so that no one can kind of, you know, you've earned that and you've made that, unless I don't get it.
I think RWE are arguing that Germany needs this energy, and it is for the good of the German population that they dig up this this last remaining coal. And also, the deal was that in exchange for being able to dig up this coal, they would bring forward the ultimate phase out. So that was like the payoff, right? That instead of it being 2038, it'll be 2030, which is also a Green Party aim. Mm-hmm. And so they said, like, if you let us dig out this coal, then we will promise to stop digging all coal by 2030 instead of 2038. That was the deal. Mm-hmm. Why were they allowed to make that deal? I'm not going to stake
my life fucking savings on that happening. Are you fucking kidding me?
Yeah. So another thing to bring into this before we kind of get into why was this deal made or how did it come to this, is that, you know, as everyone knows, Russia invaded Ukraine in February of last year, and that led to an extraordinarily dependent country like Germany to start making all of these pretty terrible decisions for the climate, but decisions that were arguably necessary for economic stability, but at the same time they definitely didn't do enough with energy savings and energy efficiency, which they could have done a lot more to actually like bring down the amount of gas that we were using. But one of the ways that they did that to bring down the gas was to use coal power stations to turn them back on. And RWE got 2 coal power stations turned back on that were either sunsetting at the end of 2022 or had already sunsetted at the end of 2021. And what this meant was their capacity, their ability to burn more coal suddenly went up, and they have been using it ever since they were allowed to, since the beginning of August. They have another 2 years to do this, to burn more coal than they originally would have been able to burn under the original 2038 plan if Russia had never invaded Ukraine. So what we're seeing with Lützerath is the kind of the business as usual plan of RWE up until 2030 also includes 2 power plants that are going to be online for 2 years more than what they would have gone online or what they would have had before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which basically means, if you kind of do the emissions math, is that they took coal burning that would have happened from 2030 onwards until 2038 and they moved it to this decade. Now there's a couple of things to point out here. That coal in the 2030s would most likely have been very unprofitable. Lignite is due to become pretty unprofitable from 2028 onwards.
Yeah.
The other thing to point out is that with ETS certificates, so energy trading system certificates, it probably also would have become, you know, extremely expensive. And the country would have sort of said, why are we doing this? Are we subsidising the cost of this energy? And probably brought it to an end anyway. So what they have managed to do, and this is why RWE is singing to the cash point, is they've managed to take unprofitable coal from the 2030s and move it into the 2020s. Now, the federal government knew that this was the case back in July, and we know that because their legislation that allowed these coal plants to come back online admitted that this would mean more emissions in the near term would be created, and they would need to do something about that. The federal government left a line or put a line in that legislation to extend the life of retired coal plants. They put a line in that basically said one of the ways in which we could prevent or we could prevent these emissions from accumulating into being more by 2030 is we can save Lützerath. We don't need to destroy Lützerath. And thus we would be able to renege or bring those emissions down. Because we're talking
like
about
it would cancel it, it would balance it out.
Cancel, bounce
okay.
out. So we're talking about 280 million tons of carbon. It's about 170 million tons of coal that's under Lützerath. It's one of those sort of, you've got coal tends to be, when you're doing lignite mining, tends to be in like these lines under the earth.
Yeah.
And it's an especially thick one. It's a big fat whopper. So we've got about 170 million tons of coal under there.
Another technical question: why do they have to do an open cast mine? Because it looks like the moon, the surface of the moon. It's like it destroys the landscape when you do this, isn't it? You kind of eat up. They have to use these giant, colossal machines. It looks like something out of a science fiction film where they just chew up the earth. Why do they have to do it like that? Why can't they do it like with like just a tunnel?
Well, it's close to the earth. So when you have coal that's close to the earth, often, or even oil that's close to the earth, like the tar sands. So the tar sands in Canada also have a similar situation where they're close to the surface of the earth, and therefore they just they scrape off the top of the earth's surface, and they get the raw materials that are underneath it. And that's the same with,
is that what's referred to as like the oil fields, or is
the oil
something?
Fields?
Yeah, okay.
The tar sands or the oil fields. I mean, they're so big you can see them from space.
Yeah,
it's like a scar on the earth, and Garzweiler, and you can see them actually if you go on the train to Brussels. From Cologne to Brussels, you will pass by Garzweiler 2, and you'll also pass by a number of other open cast mines in the Ruhr region, and they're huge. They are absolutely massive. And if you go on the motorway as well, you'll also see a few of them. Like they are these massive scars on the landscape. And that actually brings me on to most likely the situation here. Okay, so why did this deal happen? Why was RWE so adamant about destroying Lützerath? Partly because of the profit thing. They can't believe their luck. They've managed to move coal burning from one decade of unprofitability to another decade of mega bucks. Yeah. But the other reason is because when you have an open cast mine and you recultivate it after it's been finished, there is some, basic stuff that you have to do for recultivation. It's not as good as it should be. We need way better laws on recultivation, way better. And also way more stringent controls on how companies actually recultivate that land. And we should refuse to pay for that as well, because they've gotten all these profits from destroying it. They should have to pay to recultivate it. And they do to some extent, but they try to find the cheapest possible way of recultivation. And this is essentially another reason that is thought to be the main reason why RWE wants to destroy Lützerath, because they need something that comes out of that mining process that is called overburden. Overburden is basically all the crap that you get as well as the coal, all the stones and the mud and the excess carbon that's sort of chopped up in these buggers. That's the stuff that they need to fill in one particular massive hole in Garzweiler 2. There's for some reason, like if you just put water in it, it would immediately acidify and infect the groundwater around it. So they can't just put water in, they can't just flood it. They need to fill the hole.
So they're digging another hole to fill the other hole?
Yeah.
Oh dear Jesus Christ.
So they need Lützerath in order to fill that hole. And if they don't have Lützerath, their argument is, well, then we'd have to, destroy somewhere else. Or
we need a hole. If we don't take it from here, we're gonna dig up anyone's house.
It'll be your house next.
We'll dig this hole. The hole is coming, one way or the other. Is it a good time to also remind everyone about, but wind turbines are also ugly?
Yes.
The man who made this deal, one of the important
I'm really missing the booze. There's like an alarming clarity of thought.
She's just not doing it, is it?
It's awful, isn't it? It's awful.
Fuck.
It's so sober. Anyway, right. It won't have escaped a lot of voters' attention that the Green Party is in power both in Germany and in North Rhine-Westphalia. And our climate minister is Robert Habeck, and economy minister, and he has been defending this deal that he made in October. and saying things like it is an agreement that serves climate protection, creates legal certainty, and puts into place the binding nature that has always been demanded, including by the climate protection movement, that no more coal will be used to generate electricity in the Rhenish mining area from 2030. And he says that Lützerath, he says it's good that climate movements have symbols, but he says Lützerath is the wrong symbol because no one lives there anymore anyway. And
yes, but they didn't just go somewhere else.
Yeah, they're not
moved somewhere else. They don't live there because fucking RWE made it impossible and they had to go to court. Oh, Robert.
Well, they also... there's also nothing... The climate movement's not interested in Lützerath. Okay, it sees it as what it is, which is basically like a large hof, a large farm, and some other buildings that are close by as well. Like, it's not about the village. Obviously, yeah. Robert, it's about the emissions. Obviously.
Yes. Sorry,
Mr.
Robert,
Habeck.
did you want to finish?
Well, no, that's good. I was
talking to Habeck.
And
because he listens.
The other thing is that he pointed out is that this is better than the European Union emissions trading system, which is what is in place. And he says, for me, this is too uncertain. But with this deal that we have with RWE, we have more legal clarity. So we know that by 2030 there'll be no more emissions. And the argument as well, I read somewhere, was that by doing these emissions, they are not increasing the overall emissions in the whole of the EU, because part of the EU trading thing, like there has to be less emissions somewhere else in Europe because of this.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a mess. It's a jumbled hunk of mess. And ultimately, like, I think climate policy is so fragmented and so confusing that, if you believe that, it's very easy to fall into these kind of traps. And actually, Habeck has admitted before that he's gotten very complicated things wrong, like with the Gaspreisbremse, for instance, and I think, okay, so he's talking about like three things all at once, and it's really important to distinguish them and say that nothing's going to work on its own. He's right? The emissions trading system is not going to work on its own. But I love the fact that he says in that quote that he doesn't have faith that the emissions trading system is going to lead to a coal phase out in this country. So we need something else. We need an extra law. But then he says when it comes to emissions, on the other hand, these emissions are going to be absolutely fine because the emissions trading system is going to sort it out. So
yeah, well, to be fair, that's probably me who mixed those things up because I was just various Habeck quotes.
It's not just you. That's what. So that's the excuse that RWE uses. RWE says the emissions trading system's out there for a reason. It's there to sort out this emissions problem. And just because we're going to make a stunning amount of profit on burning coal in this decade, other people are going to have to, suck up the cost of emissions trading certificates, and they're not going to want to suck up that cost, and so they're automatically going to become green. So that's kind of the logic here. And to be honest, I'm not an expert on emissions trading system, but I asked a colleague of mine, and the way he put it was, this is the kind of narrative that has been debunked. There isn't a bath full of emissions where if you just let out the tap in one place, it lowers it, and if you put the tap on in another place, it highs it up. Like that's not the way things work. And these systems are much, much more complicated. So there is absolutely no guarantee that these emissions will be saved somewhere else. And if they are going to be saved somewhere else, then the government should at least give us an idea about where. In July, they said, we won't destroy Lützerath. That was their advice to NRW, was we need to find these emissions somewhere. Not destroying Lützerath would be a good way to do that because it would save so much carbon. They've gone back on that. Are they expecting the construction industry to save those emissions? Are they expecting... Habeck's going after the transport ministry just like every other Green. They love to hold up Wissing, the transport secretary, as being this terrible transport minister who's not doing anything on emissions reductions. But you've just added 280 million tonnes of carbon to our budget. Who's going to bring that down? So it's this question of like, yes, you can hold up the transport ministry and say they need to do more. They already have an excess carbon budget of 134 million to bring down by 2030. Are we going to make that 300 and something million?
Yeah.
You know, it's just a crazy conversation. Like if we're honest about why RWE is burning the coal under Lützerath, they're doing it to move the profits or to move that coal from the 2030s to the 2020s. That's the reason they're doing it. They're doing it because it's a cheaper way to fill in that hole. And they're doing it because they want to make as much profit as possible. Yeah. They're set to make billions, multiple billions of profit on Lützerath. Of course they have a stake in the game. This deal was made with the Greens in a closed-door meeting that has no transparency whatsoever in October. It wasn't the Coal Commission. The Coal Commission, at least, though it was flawed, was transparent. We knew what happened. We knew the discussions around that. We know what essentially led that Coal Commission to make the decision of a 2038 phase-out. The climate movement said that's way too late. It's not a good compromise. But ultimately, that was a transparent process. This process was a closed-door deal with RWE. And the fact that Robert Habeck has gone from his July position of don't bugger Lützerath in order to save the emissions that we're going to have to use for the energy crisis, you know, that we're going to have to make because of the energy crisis, to now saying, oh, actually, we need those emissions as well for the energy crisis, which is not true. It just feels like something happened in that room that we don't know, where, who knows, threats could have been made, promises of donations could have been made, promises of investment in hydrogen could have been made. Who knows what was said by RWE, but RWE managed to convince two very prominent Green politicians of something that is completely against both of their previous campaign stances and also both of their previous intellectual positions.
And who was in the room?
So the energy minister and her team, Robert Habeck and his team, and RWE.
Okay, just those three. That's Mona Neubauer.
Mona Neubauer.
Yeah, she's from North Rhine-Westphalia. Yeah.
Yeah, and of course, like, it definitely serves the purpose of the SPD to be shoving Habeck in front of all of these decisions, and also it serves the purpose of the CDU to also very much distance itself from this in NRW as well. The police action has been coordinated as well by a Green. In the head of the Aachen police is a Green as well. So you have all of these Green characters basically, like, firstly making terrible deals with the historically largest emitter in history, guys. That's RWE, historically the largest emitter in history. Wow. And that owns the most polluting coal plants in the whole of the EU. Like, this is the deal that they made. And then on the other hand, you've got their police chief who's fighting against the climate movement and from what we hear, using brutal and uncontrolled tactics against climate protesters.
Yeah, what do we know? I mean, I've only seen some, like, videos on Twitter of policemen getting stuck in the mud and a man dressed as a monk pushing them over. That was pretty funny. Yeah. What else? Have you seen that? Oh.
No, I haven't. I think someone sent it to me and I haven't watched it yet.
There was like a group of like half a dozen policemen all stuck in the mud, and because they've got all this heavy gear on, they just can't move, and all these climate protesters standing around them, looking at them, and then this monk comes over, and this one policeman's trying to stand up, and he keeps pushing him over. It's quite funny. Anyway, but on a more serious note, what do we know that has been happening? Because, I mean, it's not true that the German police doesn't always have a great reputation in these situations. I mean, I remember 2017 in Hamburg, where Olaf Scholz was the mayor, was there when there was I think it was the G7 meeting, and there was a lot of, and they basically had to clear the streets of Hamburg, and Hamburg's kind of a left-wing hotspot as well, so they kind of cleared away these streets with riot police. So it's not like the German police has got a great reputation with dealing with crowds, but what do we actually know that happened?
So you've got it in two phases, really. So the first phase, I would say, was last week. And last week was getting protesters out of Lützerath. And press people were really found it very difficult to actually get into Lützerath itself. So it's hard to know for sure, but we know, for instance, that protesters were being sort of manhandled out of their positions inside of houses and out of their positions inside of tree houses as well.
So they've kind of been squatting this little village since 2020.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Like there's sort of like a hardcore number of people, about 200 or so, who have been squatting for a longer amount of time. But then by the beginning of January, we had around 500 people there. So the idea was, let's make this as hard as possible so it takes as long as possible. And it's the tactic is sort of utilizing this idea of like keep in the press as long as possible, you know, really drag politicians' names through the mud so they are thinking, okay, like this is the only power that people have, right? I mean, RWE had that power in that room to sway two people who know a lot about the climate crisis. These are people who are not CDU politicians who want to ignore that the climate crisis exists. They are people who really care about the climate crisis, I think. Yeah. If we haven't got them totally wrong. And RWE, with its power and whatever it promised or whatever threats it made, managed to sway two incredibly passionate politicians who want to save the climate. What power do people have, you know, in rebuttal when you've lost all your court cases and the court has not, and the law has essentially not managed to come up for you, apart from the fact that we have a climate protection law, which this will completely destroy. What can you actually do? What is the recourse? And protest and occupation is a recourse. It's a form of recourse, and it should be, in a democracy, very much protected as a right for people who aren't going to succeed in going through the law or don't have the same kind of power as a company like RWE. So they went in there, so this is the first stage, and the police were far more successful and achieved their aim of basically evacuating Lützerath through force very quickly, much faster than people thought. People thought it was going to go on for weeks. And the hope was that these protesters would be able to stay inside long enough for the demonstration that was organised for the 14th of January. It was going to attract thousands of people. For those people to then come and sort of like add reinforcements and like try to get more people into the village and try to sort of like, you know, obviously bring the press attention and you know, get the press there and make sure that, you know, these people in occupied houses were getting interviewed, and kind of like they did with Hambach Forest. Which ultimately worked, right? But I think Hambach Forest, now we probably see it as having worked because of the architecture of the tree houses. They were just much harder to evict and much more difficult.
Interesting. I mean, that's a good...
Do we do a little recap of what happened at Hambach Forest? So do we want to do
I
that?
don't know if I...
So it's also in this region.
Yeah, it's the other side of the mine.
Yeah, and also, there's a bit of woodland, and they took them, and eventually the protesters won in court. I believe they actually saved quite a lot of the forest.
The 10% that was still remaining, they managed to save.
Yeah.
The 10% of ancient woodland.
And this is not just like, this is like one of these
it's a primal forest, yeah.
Primal forest, which is like...
It's like...
I said this before we started recording. All of this sounds like it is coming. This is like Lord of the Rings, other century stuff, like fucking Sauron building these fiery mines in the pits of... I don't get it. And like, oh, we're going to cut down all these trees. And I think, yeah, what are we supposed to do? And again, we come back to this thing of like, who are the police supposed to be serving and protecting? And I think it's made very, very clear that it's usually huge, you know, corporations or people who own loads of apartments and want to evict people, or I don't know.
Yeah, I guess in this, coming back to your earlier question that I didn't really answer very well, and I don't think I would be able to answer it. It's like, whose private property are you protecting? Yeah. Are you protecting the private property of Herr Eckert, who has been forced to leave after years and years of fighting
and
to keep his farm?
The good capitalist game of being a landowner and having a farm. You know, that's not... He's not a squatter. And he's still... So then... And he said, literally, now the climate movement have to take over. And it's... Yeah, it's so weird. I'm assuming that Habeck is in this position, because I think about him quite often. After our conversation about him being this kind of like 90s crumpled rom-com lead, now I'm just like, he is not Mr. Darcy, friends. He is Wickham. He is Wickhaming all over the show.
Oh my God. Yes.
Who's
Lydia? Who's stupid enough to go along with his stupid plans?
I don't know. Maybe this woman out in...
Mona Neubauer.
Exactly.
Mona Neubauer.
So I'm assuming that he's thinking a lot about his... And I think this is the problem with politicians. And this is why because people who go into politics, yes, they want to do good things, but they're also people who want to go into politics. Like... I don't know, like...
Power, ultimately.
Any sound people who are just like... I think it is a power thing. I think it's a lot to do with not really having found your place. You're seeking a lot of external validation somehow. I don't know, in certain things. And I would imagine you don't want to be the energy minister if the lights go out and the heat goes off in Germany, because that's disastrous and you're never coming back from that. And you're young and you look like a rom-com. So, you want to have your career. But Robert... if you're listening, at some point, this is a long game thing here. You can't just keep going into closed rooms and making deals with the devil. Like, you can't...
I think he thinks he is playing the long game. Firstly, I think he's definitely drunk.
Very fucking stupid.
Well, I think he thinks of, just like many people, young people don't vote in the same numbers as older people. Older people, by and large... if they're on the climate, or if they kind of care about green issues, if they're a bit older, they really gave a shit about nuclear. Do you know, that's where their generation was. It's like, fight nuclear, let's get rid of nuclear. And are they as engaged with climate? I'm not sure. It's definitely a youth-powered movement within this country. It has a lot of older members, and it has a lot of people who are very, very engaged with it, and also mass support as well. Well over 70% of the population of Germany want something to be done about climate protection.
Yeah.
But is it a mobilising force within the older generation of the Green Party as much as, say, nuclear was? I don't think so. I think that the game that he is playing is, I'm looking at, if I'm Habeck, I'm looking at 2025 and I'm thinking, I want to be where Schultz is. And
that's what I think that's the game he's playing.
There.
But I'm talking, if you want to be like a passionate green politician and you really believe in this, like, it's someday you're going to be dying on your deathbed and you have to look back and, like, I don't know, I guess I'm asking him to put his ideals ahead of his own political career, but I don't know why I think that is anything that anyone would, but
it's who do you think's going to get you there? Are a bunch of teenagers going to get you there?
But even, like, surely are your ideals ultimately just more important than... And it sounds like this is not as if you're sort of saying, yes, the ideological thing to do is this, but the pragmatic thing to do is this. Like, there doesn't seem to be... This all seems to be very wishful thinking and not pragmatic. It's like this idea of, like, well, first of all, we'll make up the emissions elsewhere, which even if we do we know scientifically that the emissions from a fucking massive lignite mine that's going to scar the landscape can be made up because somebody else is going to switch on some wind turbines somewhere else in the EU? Like, does that work with science? I don't know. And secondly...
This is funny because last week we had Nathaniel on.
Yeah.
And he said this is why he doesn't vote, because he thinks that these movements are more powerful when they're in opposition.
Yeah, maybe.
When they get into power, they inevitably cause more damage.
Yeah, it's interesting to think if we were having this energy crisis and it was a CDU, anyway. Like if the Greens were in opposition, like would they be in a different position now and able to garner everyone's kind of increasing, like you're saying, over 70% of people in Germany, and I think it is like it's so much a conversation on everyone's minds. Mm-hmm. Like would the Greens, where they were in opposition, be actually building up to really like a more positive result in when's the next general election? 2025?
2025, yeah.
I don't fucking know.
I'd like to ask a totally different question. Energy security. So another argument is all about, Russia, everything, we haven't got enough energy. People were worried about the gas supplies weren't going to be full this winter. And So RWE were arguing this is why this coal is so important. And
It's
I
for
think,
the people.
And Robert Habeck has made a lot of, a lot of his political capital has been in the fact that he's secured these deals to secure, and he's organised the gas supplies, and they're now full. But I read that there were a couple of reports somehow saying that maybe this coal isn't as necessary as it might appear. Is that true?
100%. So we have 3 independent studies versus 1 RWE study. Okay. Who do you believe? So we've got 3 independent reports that basically tell us the numbers, and so here are the numbers. So
I don't want to hear the numbers. The sober time of.
So the Deutsche Institute for Wirtschaft, the DIW, that is very much sort of like on TV a lot through Claudia Kempfert, who you will see a lot as sort of the person to talk about energy transition. A lot of the time she's dragged onto a lot of these TV shows. So they did a report that basically laid out that there are around 301 million tonnes of coal that will be dug up in the existing approved areas of Garzweiler 2 and Hambach mines before 2030. If the coal plants, the lignite coal plants that RWE has on until 2030 are at full capacity running until 2030, they will need around 271 million tonnes of lignite coal to run at full capacity. That's 30 less than they will have with the existing approved areas. So that's from that study. So basically it says you've already got 300 and something million tonnes coming in the pipeline. You only need 271, and that's at full capacity, and that's really optimistic figures for a coal plant that often runs at 50% capacity. So there is no reason for you to dig up 170 million extra tonnes of coal. Right, so that's one argument. RWE claims that if they're running at full capacity, they are missing 17 million tonnes. So there's 17 million tonnes by 2030 that they're missing, so they need more. It's going to have to come from somewhere. And their argument with Lützerath is it doesn't really make sense just to dig up like 17 million tonnes. You bulldoze an area, because I mean you see these excavators, they're absolutely gargantuan, right? They're not precise. It's not like they cut a slice of a small cake. They destroy entire villages.
Yeah.
They've destroyed an entire region, right? They are huge, and it's not precise enough just to sort of take 17 million. You're going to take all of it and you're going to burn all of it, and if you don't burn it, you're going to sell it to someone and they're going to burn it. So that's, I mean, the energy security thing is 17 million tonnes of lignite coal. I'm sure we could live without it. I'm sure we could live without that. So that's their argument. And so when Robert Habeck says energy security,
no,
he's taking the line of RWE, and he's ignoring the independent studies done by 3 different independent analysis and
what
independent
has
think tanks.
happened in this room? You've painted a very vivid picture, and now I'm just like, what is going? Presumably he's aware of these studies, like I'm aware of it, and I don't know shit about fuck.
That is like what he wanted, a 2030 figure, right? He said in his
so he thinks he's going to be
agreement,
the guy that negotiated. Is this what he thinks? He's going to be the champion that got RWE to finally stop emitting.
That's what he hoped. But Lützerath and the press coverage it's got on an international level has destroyed that. And now he's talking in these extraordinarily, I mean, like I saw him on like an interview the other day, and he used this ridiculous language. I mean, he's taken Shakespearean to another level. He said, it's a sin for us to be bulldozing Lützerath, but it's the final sin. And it's like, fuck's sake.
What?
How many sins are you going to commit? You're already committing a sin.
These lads have no intention. If they have enough coal to burn at full capacity, even if they're not doing it, these lads, these RWE ones, they're not going to stick to this 2030, because we've never stuck to anything. We've never held, there is no precedent for anyone ever sticking to a fucking climate agreement. And these guys apparently have everyone in their back pocket. So even if you finally have a green energy minister in Germany in the face of finally enormous public support for climate measures. And he still is like, oh yeah, get the really bad stuff out of the ground and we'll arrest Greta Thunberg while we're at it. Fine. Have at it, lads. There's no fucking way these cunts think that they are stopping everything in 2030. Are we insane?
I do disagree. I think
okay, good. Thank
Lord. Look at the nuclear
Oh,
power stations, right? They said we're going to phase these out by the end of 2022, and you know what? They didn't do it. They're going to be phased out by April. But that was really, really important to all the old fogies who, you know, were like really involved in that.
It's a lot of this like boomer energy.
I don't know. It's like, I don't really get it. I think because I came into the climate world, you know, well after that debate was finished and wrapped up in a bow and chucked out the window. Like, I just never really concerned myself with why people hate nuclear so much.
It's because they read Die Wolke. Have you read Die Wolke? Do you know what that is?
But I feel like it's the equivalent of Ministry of the Future of the 1970s.
No, I had to read it at A-level German. It's a book from the 80s, and it's like a kind of a young adult kind of book, and it's about a nuclear disaster happening in Germany. And this sort of, and Die Wolke is the cloud that's spreading over Germany, and it does, if you're young in the 80s, you that did strike fear into your heart. And it was also, I think it was also Chernobyl, and I think that kind of generation, I think that there is a real fear of nuclear fallout and nuclear I mean, it is bad, I mean, it's dangerous, but I think there was a generational thing.
But it doesn't happen.
And that book was I had to
it's
do
not going to kill us all though, is it? I mean, if they all went off at the same time, then we'd be fucked. But like, I mean, it's not like climate crisis, is it?
Do you think, I was also thinking like our generation of sort of climate awareness is just like, okay, but imagine like nuclear disaster, but just like in most places, like those kind of effects are just like everywhere. We're like, okay. And it does just seem like this odd to be really, and I'm not saying that obviously like they're huge disasters and it's incredibly dangerous and etc., but it also almost seems like this luxury thing to be able to really care about nuclear because of, you know, I don't know.
I feel like I'm like theoretically like against nuclear. Because I'm like super pro solar and wind. I'm like, guys, this is obviously the option. It's so fucking cheap.
We've solved it. It's not like we're all sitting around going, what could we possibly do? We fucking know. Like, this is the completely demented thing. But I don't know. Hopefully, right, I'm excited. So you're saying 6 years. Evie,
7, babe. 7.
7. Yeah,
sorry. They won't have those coal plants anymore. They trust me, they will be off, but they will have burnt all of the coal that they were gonna burn until 2038. They will have just burnt it fucking quicker.
It's just like, fine. You want us to do it by 2030, 2038, 2030. We've got this amount of money to make. We're gonna make it.
We're gonna make it now. We're gonna make it then. They will have made more. Because it would have been unprofitable by the 2030s. So they're going to make more money on the same fucking emissions. I mean, that's the thing about this deal is it's just, it blows your mind. And we are basing this on I'm basing this on a study that was done by Aurora in October or in November, just after the deal, which basically said that no emissions would be saved by this deal because of the coal plants that were being kept online for an extra period of time. So, yeah. You can say, you can put 2030 on your election poster in 2025, Robbie. You can do that. That's fine. But the climate movement has access to the internet. They have access to knowledge that maybe the Die Wolke generation didn't have access to. You know, they kind of know their shit. And they don't care about a date in time. They care about emissions. They care about climate. It is very
patronising, isn't it? And he's like, yeah, but 2030.
2030, baby.
Yeah, but what's 2030 going to look like if we've just dug up all the villages and burned all of the stuff? It's not like when you misunderstanding, it's just like, we've got to get it all done, but it's not a deadline like where we have to burn all of the like fossil fuels.
Do it now.
That's not the game we're playing. So my friend who said to me once was like misunderstanding these things like
what is Aurora? You just mentioned Aurora.
Aurora is it's an independent think tank, and
Okay.
they did this study for EBC, so Europe Beyond Coal campaign.
Right.
And you can find it online.
Yes.
It's in German and it's extremely complicated. To be honest, I had to read it 3 times to understand the first couple of paragraphs. Not
But
just
you
because
did.
it's in
You
German,
did
but it's my job. I don't really force anyone to do that, really. It's just
You read it, so we all don't have to.
Exactly, there you go.
Thank you. Anything else on your notes there? Or did we ask everything?
My little notes.
Did you-
I think we've covered a lot of it. I mean, we
Pretty
didn't
cool
go
stuff.
too much into depth about the protests themselves. None of us were there.
No.
But I think ultimately we do have a lot of sympathy with the protesters, and
Yeah.
I have a huge amount of respect for the people who turned up on the 14th, and a massive amount of respect for the people who occupied and attempted to stop this travesty from going ahead. And
Got quite
they're still
badly
there,
injured in
right?
the process,
They're still there.
apparently.
People who got badly injured, it's absolutely criminal. I think there will be an inquiry. I think it's going to take years. I think some of the police officers will be given, not a slap on the wrist, and that will be a news story in of itself. But I think it just goes to show, who's on whose side here. And I think it's horrific, because I think a world where young people feel they can't vote for the Green Party it's not a world I want to live in. I'm really scared of that world, because who the fuck do they vote for?
Yeah.
And that's really scary. And if they don't turn up to polls, we are all completely screwed, because Volker generation, they ain't gonna do nothing for us.
No.
And on that note,
Any positives? Anything to look forward to? I
mean, last time we were talking about how
exciting.
super sexy Habeck was, but now
No.
we're like,
I mean, a fall of
That's
some
morning
kind
after
of
the night
nonsense
before.
man is
That's
always
been-
kind of good to watch. All his crumpled nonsense. It's not.
even that's been taken away from us.
It's not even anything good. It's not hiding behind the sad. It's just all crumpled and a bit dirty, and not in the good way.
We've got an episode of Radio Spätkauf coming up on Sunday evening
Ah, yeah.
at 1900 at Karsk, which is a brewery where I'll have to find the one non-alcoholic beverage to drink.
I quite like a non-alcoholic beer, but yeah,
They're all right.
yeah, they're not.
all right.
They're not bad.
So yeah, if you want to come along to that, we're going to be doing a live recording there. And
Where is it?
Karsk is right next to Rosa Luxemburg Strasse,
Oh,
U-Bahn
okay.
station.
Cool.
And I'm also doing a social movements tour, one of my social movements tour that I do every couple of months. It's a tour that takes us through the history of social movements in Germany over a 70-year period from 1848 until 1919. So it's kind of bookended by 2 revolutions, and goes from the story of Karl Marx to the story of Rosa Luxemburg, and talks about social movements that happened here in the city of Berlin. So I'll be doing that on the 4th of February. And if you want to come to that, it's at 2 p.m. or it starts at 2 p.m. at the Martin Luther statue in next to Alexanderplatz,
Oh, wow.
in front
Cool.
of the Marienkirche.
I
Oh,
think
yeah.
I'm out of the country, but I really want to come on one of your tours. Really muchly.
They're really fun.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks very much.
Do we need to talk about what happened?
Oh, yeah.
The best thing that's happened. Let's finish on some good news.
Oh, yeah. So thanks very much to our listener, Jan, who sent us a box of goodies.
It's the most amazing thing that I'm so touched by this, Jan. Thank you so much.
It's lovely. He sent us some Japanese mega cans.
I'm in equal parts excited and terrified to try them. And we keep talking about doing like
We're going to do a mega can only special where
Yes.
we only talk about mega cans
yeah, it's
for
going to be
for our
like
patrons.
yeah, exactly.
Go to Megan's Mega Can. Patreon.com. I
We
keep
don't
getting it
have
wrong.
a website.
We don't have a website. Patreon.com/Megan's Mega Can,
Yeah.
and you can give us some money. Okay.
And thank you
Thanks
very,
much.
very, very much to Izzy. Thanks
Thanks,
you.
Izzy. Take care. And see you next time.
See you next time. Bye, everyone. Stay
Bye.
safe.